So, good morning and welcome to this series of online sessions dedicated to creative industries in China, academic and professional perspectives, which is part of ULFLOW, Autumn International School, organized in partnership with Italy-China Council Foundation. My name is Silvia Ravazzani. I'm associate professor in management at Yale University, and I will be serving as the moderator for today, which is the last day of this series. So I'm happy to welcome all of you on behalf of Yale University. So far, in the past 2 days, we talked about fashion design, food, and communication, while today, in this 1 hour and a half, we'll be focusing on cinema. But before we get started, I just want to give the word to Francesco Boggio Ferraris for a welcome also from Italy-China Council Foundation.
Oh, thank you, Silvia. Thank you to Ms. Professor Silvia Ravazzani, and good morning to all of you attending to our last of these 3 days. I know you're connected from all over the world, and in this path that we'll be sharing and working together, a warm welcome also on behalf of our Italy-China Council Foundation Academy, where we train and manage an intercultural approach, the same that we're designing and delivering in these days together with you. So I'm very, very happy and glad to be here today and to listen with all of you to the many interesting things that our partners and speakers, honorable guests, will have to share in terms of contents and expertise on the Chinese and European film and audiovisual industries, which share, by the way, a prestigious and cultural and authorial tradition that dates back to the past and are committed both to technological experimentation on one side and new forms and expression on cinema, but also series, web series, and video games industries. So it's a huge world to explore, a very up-to-date industry, which will be one of the leading industries even more in the future due to the importance that the video is gaining to all the generations of consumers as well. So thanks again, Silvia, all of you. I'll leave the floor to you for our first important guest.
Yes, I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Chiara Grizzaffi, who is Research Fellow in Italian Film Production at Yale University. So thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for this invitation to speak today as part of this series of talk dedicated to creative industries and China. I have to make a premise. As a scholar, I've studied film production from an historical and cultural perspective, and I'm not an expert on film economy. However, today I will attempt to make an overview about cinema as creative industry that inevitably cannot be exhaustive, but nonetheless I will try to give some general perspectives about it. It must be said that traditionally film studies have often neglected the economic side of it and have rarely been concerned with the productive and industrial aspects of cinema. This is due to the fact that there has been a strong prejudice around film as an art and as a subject of study. Film is an entertainment product designed for a market. It's a commodity then, but it also holds an artistic and cultural value. Film criticism and film studies often had to fight to have the cultural and artistic status of cinema recognized, and consequently to gain legitimacy as disciplines. This has been at the expense of the attention to film production and its economic aspects. Such a gap, however, has been filled in recent years by a number of important studies that also in Italy are contributing to our knowledge of the mechanisms of cinema as a creative industry. I would like to mention at least the work of Marco Cucco, Economia del Film, the anthology edited with Giuseppe Richieri, L'Industria del Cinema, and the one edited with Giacomo Manzoli, Il Cinema di Stato. I would also like to mention the research conducted by Barbara Corsi on film production, and in particular her book Con qualche dollaro in meno, Storia economica del cinema italiano. These essential studies are also the key bibliographical references for my talk, with which I would like to attempt to trace a path within the complex landscapes of the film industry, so as to highlight some of the main trends, as well as the challenges, the opportunities, and the critical issues of what is still a key sector of the creative industries. Indeed, it is often said that cinema is perhaps an art and entertainment medium that has become outdated, replaced by other media products, or that films are less and less relevant to audiences. These are somewhat short-sighted considerations, which, as we shall see, come from Western-centric perspectives that do not take into account the expensive phases that the industry experiences, for example, in non-Western countries. The film industry is a complex system involving a wide range of subjects, of stakeholders. It involves, first and foremost, production and distribution companies, whose structures and business models can vary significantly, but it also concerns public institutions, which may be involved in various ways in the production, dissemination, and promotion of the film. Private bodies that contribute in various ways to its financing. It feeds a complex systems of events, such as award ceremonies and festivals. And finally, it concerns all of us, the audience, because cinema shapes imaginaries, mobilizes passions, generates fandom phenomena at a global level. Traditionally, the film industry chain is considered to be roughly divided into three phases. The first is that of production, which in turn is divided into three stages: the pre-production of a film, so the writing, planning, preparation for filming; the production, the shooting of the film; and post-production, editing, the addition of effects, and so on. The second phase is the distribution and advertising of the product of the film. So the moment when the film is sold to exhibitors and broadcasters, generally through the work of certain intermediaries, and it's also promoted. Lastly, there is the exhibition phase, which consists of the screening of the film in theaters, in cinemas, used for this purpose. Cinemas, but also cultural venues such as museums and other kind of venues. Today, however, it would be more appropriate to speak more in general, instead of exhibition only, of consumption, since the home video and the streaming releases are becoming increasingly important. As you might have guessed, the ways in which the chain was described, in which I've described this chain today, are somewhat inadequate to describe the contemporary transformation. If the cinema was the privileged, if not only venue, for the encounter between the film and its audience, today it is only one of several options we have for film consumption. Moreover, the concept of the chain refers to an idea of linear paths, steps that follow one another in an organized fashion. Instead, it often happens that some stages overlap or occur in a different order from the one I have described. For example, a film might be pre-purchased for distribution when it has not yet been shot, perhaps on the basis of a subject or of a screenplay. The promotion of the film may also begin while the film is still being made. As a creative industry, cinema also generates profits, not only for the companies that are directly involved in the production chain, but also for other industries that are more or less directly connected to it. Films capture and influence lifestyles and consumption styles. For this reason, a successful synergy can be created between cinema and other industry producing goods and services through the promotion of film products. For example, the so-called product placement. But let's also think of the phenomenon of cinetourism. It is not uncommon for places to benefit from a tourist boom due to the fact that they have served as locations for the filming of successful films. It happened with New Zealand, for example, following the release of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But it has also happened recently to some places here in Italy, for example, Bergamo, the Bergamo area that served as the setting for the events depicted in Luca Guadagnino's Call Me By Your Name. But let's discuss now some of the peculiarities of the film industry. The film industry is characterized by high fixed costs, those costs which do not vary with the amount of units produced. The number of copies in which a film is made, in short, has less of an impact than the production costs of the film. Consequently, we speak of an industry in which the making of the prototype, the film itself, has very high costs. Like the creative industries, more in general, the film industry is also characterized by a high rate of demand uncertainty, despite the fact that very expensive marketing campaigns are conducted or that studies on the audience and its tastes abound. Film production is nevertheless a risky business because it is not easy to foresee the audience reception or the incidence of the external factors that can dramatically increase costs or drastically decrease revenues. Think of what happened with the pandemic or the blow inflicted now in the US industry by the actors' strike in the past few weeks. It is an industry with a very high level of competition. The supply of films is very high, and the market is now more fragmented than ever. In addition to these risk factors, we should also add that, as I've already mentioned, digital technology has brought about and continues to bring about huge transformations in production, distribution, and consumption habits. Such changes are happening so fast that the sector sometimes and the institution sometimes struggles to adapt to those changes. What I've just described are some general features, but it should be pointed out that although we are in a globalized scenario where film production and circulation transcend national borders, there are still peculiarities of the industry linked to specific national context and even to regions and geographical areas within the same country. In the first instance, let's look now at some general data related precisely to the economic impact of cinema in the various countries of the world. The pandemic has undoubtedly impacted the industry, which is still recovering from the effects of the prolonged closure of cinemas and is trying to return to pre-pandemic levels of revenues. The gross box office figures from 2020 to 2022 are generally lower than those of the previous 3 years. In Europe, Italy, along with Greece, is one of the countries struggling the most to recover. However, thanks to the release of some event films promoted through hammering marketing campaigns, let's think about the Barbie movie or Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. The summer months of 2023 have seen several countries, including Italy, reach and even exceed the pre-pandemic figures in terms of admission and box office. Let me now show you some charts on the world market. The data are from the European Audiovisual Observatory and go up to 2021 included. We can see that the market with the highest revenues is China, followed by the US and Japan. The Asian presence is dominant in this chart. In the top 10, we can also find India and South Korea. But European countries such as France, the UK, and the Russian Federation also rank well. According to some reports that you can find in the Variety, the figures from 2022 are slightly different from these ones, and see the US regaining the first position and the performance of some countries, such as Russia, decreasing, while China and Japan still hold the podium with the second and third place. The data on the markets with the highest numbers of admissions, though, are different and show an even greater presence of Asian countries. According to other sources different sources from the one I'm showing you, this chart of the European Audiovisual Observatory, the country with the highest number of admissions in 2022 is India, has been India. This discrepancy with a box between these figures, these numbers, and the ones of the gross box office can be explained by the fact that in many of the countries with a high number of admissions per year, tickets prices are significantly lower than in the US and then in Europe. Where the US hegemony remains firm is in the penetration of its film products in foreign markets. US films dominate the world box office, as you can see from this chart. In this box office Mojo Top 10 ranking, you see that the first and the only non-US title is in the 9th place. It's Watergate Bridge, a film of Chinese nationality. In Europe, the market share of US films is around 60%. This is one of the main reasons why Hollywood remains in our collective imagination the quintessential film industry. However, the charts I have just shown you demonstrate also that there are very, very successful film industries beyond Hollywood. Moreover, the Hollywood-centric paradigm by which the success or failure of film national industry has often been measured is problematic because it does not take into account the specificity of these industries. Let us consider, for example, the use of terms such as Bollywood, employed to refer to the Hindi film industry, or Nollywood for the Nigerian one, as if they were simply other versions of a universal model of success, that of the Hollywood studios. The way in which the film industry works in the United States of America is characterized by certain specific features. There is a strong vertical integration of the supply chain. There is the dominance of the so-called conglomerates, big companies such as Comcast, Warner Bros. Discovery, or Disney, that own numerous smaller ones involved in mass media enterprises, and around which independent companies cluster, often with more or less close ties to these conglomerates. This model is very distant, for instance, from that of the Indian film industry, where family-run companies or those founded by successful stars or directors are prevalent at the moment. And only in recent years, India is moving towards a certain vertical integration. Yet, as we have seen, even this production system achieves remarkable results. So the situation is also quite different if we look at the European scenario. Let's see in the first instance what the figures are, the numbers are, with respect to film production and consumption in Europe. The European market at the moment is characterized by post-pandemic growth that nonetheless has not reached the pre-pandemic level. Some countries, such as Czech Republic, Denmark, or Romania, are almost reaching the emissions numbers they had before the pandemic, thus experiencing a positive trend in terms of increasing audiences. But they are not necessarily the ones generating the highest profits, evidently due to low tickets costs. Other countries, including Italy, are still struggling. As for film production, the number of films produced in Europe has almost reached pre-pandemic level. Almost 2,000 feature films have been produced in 2022 in Europe, most of them by few countries: France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and the UK. In contrast to what we observed for the United States of America, the European film industry is mainly characterized by small and medium-sized companies. For many of them, the risks associated to the making of a film ends up coinciding with a business risk, and it is not uncommon for companies to be born and to die after making a single movie. A large share of film financing in Europe comes from public funding. The contribution of broadcasters is also very important. Public funding in Europe is allocated by the individual states, countries. At the end of the 1980s, however, the European Union adopted the so-called media program. Media means measures for encouraging the development of the audiovisual industry. The actions of the media program complement those of the individual countries and are mainly concentrated in the development and distribution phases of the supply chain of European territory in order to foster cultural exchange between the countries. Next to the actions promoted by the European Union, there are those of the Council of Europe, such as the Eurimages Fund, supporting co-productions between the countries that are part of the Council. The main difficulties of the European market can be summarized as follows. It is a fragmented market made up of small countries with small audiences. Language barriers make reaching a large audience difficult, not only because of the multitude of languages spoken in Europe, but also because of the different approaches to the translation of films, for example, dubbing films versus subtitling them, adopted in each country. There are therefore difficulties in creating an extensive market. There is also a kind of underinvestment in the sector, so companies tend to spend less, but the films that earn the most are generally those that spend the most. The entrance into the market of certain production and distribution players, such as subscription video-on-demand platforms, is, however, shaking things up. Companies such as Netflix, which diversify their library according to the territory in which they are present, in which they operate, are interested in acquiring and producing audiovisual works in the countries in which they operate and in circulating these works outside their national territories. Let's move now to the Italian context. The Italian context is characterized by a few solid production realities, so Cattleya, Indigo, Filmauro, Wildside, for example, alongside broadcasters that are also producers. They also produce films, so Sky, Rai, Mediaset, and then by smaller companies, for which, again, the risk in producing a film often can coincide with business risk, and which frequently are founded to make a single title or to produce the work of a single artist, for example, a director. And vertical integration is the exception rather than the norm. The numbers for admissions and gross box office in the past few years have been fluctuating but relatively stagnant. This is due to the fact that the box office revenues in Italy, and it is also true for other European countries, mostly derive from a few titles and big film events. It's their presence that determines the successful outcome of a year over another. As I've pointed out, Italian cinema is still recovering from the effects of the pandemic, but still in 2022, the admissions numbers are lower than those of the years between 2017 and 2019. Despite this slow recovery, the numbers related to the production of Italian films are high. According to a report of the Direzione Generale Cinema e Audiovisivo in 2022, 355 Italian films were produced. Another report of Cinetel states that in 2022 were distributed 251 Italian films. These are high numbers, probably too high if we consider the uncertainties in the demand and the admissions numbers I've mentioned before. There is evidently a certain dissipation of resources, of economic resources. As in many European countries, the main sources of funding of the Italian film industry derive from state intervention and broadcasters. As far as it concerns public funding and the regulation governing the sector, they are arranged by the Ministry of Culture in agreement with other bodies such as the Ministry of Economy. In addition to film regulation policies, the so-called film-friendly policies are generally implemented. They consist, for instance, in establishing a quota of European and Italian films that broadcasters and that non-linear services must have in their library. There are also forms of direct and indirect funding. Direct funding consists of selective contribution, which means the allocation of production funds by a commission to certain type of films. For example, first and second works by directors, or films made by young authors, or films of particular artistic quality. Automatic contribution, instead, is the allocation of funds according to objective parameters, both economic and cultural or artistic. For example, the participation at awards and festivals. Tax credit is also instead a form of indirect funding. Tax credit means the discount of the taxes that a company owns if the company invests again in the in producing another film. At a local and territorial level, the contribution of film commissions, non-profit bodies whose task is to facilitate the film productions in a given territory, in a given region, also through the allocation of funds, is very important. In spite of some of the criticalities that have emerged, the film industry sector plays an important role in our country's economy. According to a research conducted by Andrea Montanino, chief economist and head of sector strategies and impact for the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, for every euro invested in the audiovisual sector in Italy, 3.54 are generated. And for every 100 million euro of increased demand for audiovisual production, so I'm not necessarily talking only of films, 2,281 jobs are created. Also, according to Montanino Research, the audiovisual sector will need 50,000 new employees in the coming years. The professions sought include below-the-line workers, such as camera operators, production workers and technicians, but also directors, writers, set designers, and so on. Some of these figures are also very difficult to find. So evidently, an important role will be played by education. In Italy, unfortunately, little attention is paid to cinema and more generally to media literacy and media education in primary and secondary schools. Although some recent initiatives promoted by the last cinema law attempt to fill this gap. At the secondary school education level, there are institutes such as the Liceo Artistico con indirizzo multimediale, Liceo Tecnico di Grafica e Comunicazione o gli istituti professionali con indirizzo Servizi Culturali dello Spettacolo, offer initial training in audiovisual productions. There are also a number of post-degree centers of excellence in the professional training, the best known of which is undoubtedly the Scuola Nazionale di Cinema of the Centro Sperimentale. There are also film studies degree at university level. I am referring obviously to the 3-year BA degree in dance, discipline delle arti figurative, della musica, dello spettacolo e della moda, and to the 2-year MA degree in Scienze dello Spettacolo e Produzione Multimediale, one of which is here at Ulm, and has the goal to educate the future professionals of the audiovisual media industry, adopting a unique combination of theory and practice. So I will conclude this very broad overview that has inevitably forced me to be maybe too concise and to try to simplify truly complex issues with a few considerations regarding the challenges looming on the horizon for the film industry. So, as some of you might know, there is a strike action currently going on in the US, promoted by the Union of Film and Film and TV Writers, the Screenwriters Guild of America, and the Actors Union, the Screen Actors Guild. Their protest revolved around two main issues, which concern streaming platforms and AI technologies. As I have already said, the arrival of platforms has had a strong impact on the sector, for example, by changing the consumption habits of the audience and giving rise to phenomena of disintermediation and redefinition of the production chain. But it has also had a major impact on jobs, as the strike highlights. Actors and screenwriters rely on the income they obtain through residuals, sums that are paid to them when the film or TV series they have worked on have reruns. These sums depend on the success of a given work. However, platforms are not very transparent about their viewership figures, making it complex for actors and writers to negotiate appropriate compensation. The advent of AI also worries actors and all workers of the sectors who fear that it will lead to an exploitation of their image and to a job reduction. These issues are, it should be emphasized, part of an already complex scenario from the point of view of the organizational structures and the work condition in the film industry. The creative industry, more in general, are unfortunately characterized by a high rate of job insecurity. Also connected to labor, there is another issue that is crucial today, the reduction of the gender gap in the film industry. In recent years, several battles have been conducted to ensure that the sets and the writing rooms become more inclusive and fairer and ethical workplaces. Nevertheless, data show that there is still a long way before we reach gender equality in the industry. According to data from the Direzione Generale del Cinema, in our country, only 13% of fiction films have been directed by a woman, and only 23% of documentaries. Other data from the European Audiovisual Observatory show that between 2017 and 2021, only 25% of the directors of feature films were women, and the percentage is even lower if we look at other below-the-line professions, such as that of the cinematographer. So, with this brief overview, I hope I've given you an idea of the richness and importance of the creative industry, such as the film industry, which is recovering after the blow inflicted by the pandemic, but still holds a strategic relevance, also thanks to the impulse given by some nations and areas of the world where the number of theaters and admissions is growing. I also hope I have highlighted some of the gray areas and the issues that urgently need to be addressed and that require answers from all the stakeholders involved, including institutions, answers that cannot be further postponed. So thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much to Dr. Grizzoffi. I think this was probably brief, but quite dense in information and inspiration. So thank you so much. You gave us a perfect overview of this creative industry of film, how it works, and how it has developed also in the face of the pandemic. Some of these current challenges, you mentioned the gender gap, just one of the last things you mentioned, job insecurity. So maybe also for the Q&A, we see, I don't know, might be that some international collaboration might mend or, I don't know, solve some of these issues or maybe increase them. But we keep this for the final Q&A. Thank you so much. So I think we have the next speaker. So maybe Francesca, if you want to introduce our guest. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Silvia. Yeah, our next speaker is actually a director. His name is Sergio Basso. He is a movie director, and he's also been working in theaters and with theaters direction, drama direction for many years now. But he's also a sonologist. He's been living and working in China since 1996. He's been working on some important fictional projects, but also documentaries in China, working with the CCTV, so directly with the China National Television. During the years, his experience obviously grew very much on this, not only market, but I would say he speaks fluently Chinese, Mandarin Chinese. He graduated also in the language in Fosbury University. So his experience is very deep, and he has a strategic and also very intimate look on both of the world, the East and the West. He's been assistant director of many important directors and movies, also in Italy, like, for example, with the movie La Stella che non c'è from Gianni Amelio. So he's been working with some authorial, traditional, and important directors in Italy and in China as well. So again, please welcome his speech, and we'll find out a little moment of Q&A maybe in the end with our spectators. Thank you.
Everybody, my name is Sergio Basso. I'm a film director, I'm here today to talk with you about creative industries in China, academic and professional perspective, cinema in China. And we might decline this theme as making movies in China. How shall we make movies in China? How difficult is it to make movies in China for a European or Western film director, film group? I had several experiences about making movies in China, so that's why I would love to share my thoughts, my previous experiences, my feedback with you this morning. So I'd like to share 4 case studies with you. And the first one is Giallo a Milano. Giallo a Milano is a documentary film I shot in 2009, 2010. The title is based on a pun, a joke, which can't be translated into English, actually. Giallo is the color of the Italian most famous whodunits, the thrillers by Arnoldo Mondadori Editore publisher. So it's a pun about who did it, who's the murder in Milan, mystery in Milan. The international title was Made in Chinatown. The topic is the integration or not integration of the Milanese Chinatown, one of the largest in Europe, the second largest after Paris, and in my opinion, the most vibrant in present day Europe. So it's a wonderful hub, it's a wonderful laboratory of exploring their interaction about the Italian and the Sino-Italian society. I shot this film in 2009, 2010. This is the trailer. Unfortunately, it's only in Italian. I guess you will get the vibes of the film.
Tuo papà com'è arrivato? Sai che poi sentivo appena come borda. Milano, via Paolo Sarpi e dintorni. Ecco la rivolta della Chinatown milanese.
Fino a ieri la comunità cinese in Italia era rimasta nascosta nei suoi quartieri autogestiti, ma di fatto pacifici. Oggi è suonato un allarme che non può essere ignorato.
Sai che non muoiono mai i cinesi, no? Il fatto che rigoriste. Sono una cosa, guarda, schifo.
Io volevo vivere la Cina di adesso, volevo vedere le grandi città. A Benzhou ho conosciuto ragazzi che facevano soldi con piccole truffe. Mio fratello in Italia era finito in un brutto guaio, si era messo con gente fuori di testa, gente che rapinava altri cinesi.
Già nel Novecento c'erano i cinesi in Italia. Il regime aveva fatto dei campi di raccolta dei cinesi come gli ebrei. E il primo campo in Italia fatto in provincia di Teramo, a Tosticcia, un paesino.
其实我知道你们学音乐的。我知道你们学音乐。Queste sono delle spirali cinesi usate. Questo che vedete ha 24 anni. L'ha avuto una donna dentro per 24 anni.
Let's talk about problems and let's talk about inspiration. I will start from the second part of the question, inspiration. We might be wondering at this early hour in the morning, why on earth I'm interested in China? Why should an Italian filmmaker film material stuff, ideas about China? My adventure in China started in 1996. I fell in love with China in 1996. I had been studying Chinese since 1994. In Venice, there is a wonderful department of Oriental languages at the Venice University. And after a couple of years, they kick you to China to learn Chinese there. in real life through real problems. And that's what I did when I was 21. I went to live in Peking, in Beijing. And since then, I had been working, studying, getting scholarships to live there, not on end, but several times. So I think I kind of totalized 3 to 4 years in China so far. And then I shot a short movie in 2002. They select me through that short movie at the National Film School in Italy, in Rome. And that's another story, and I will tell you, I'll share you this in another conversation, but they selected me. So I moved back from China to Italy, to Rome. I started to shoot movies and documentaries. And then I was Gianni Amelio, a pretty famous Italian film director's assistant director. And so I went, he was writing and then shooting a film in China, an international co-production. So I went back. And then in 2009, I actually was afraid. I was afraid because I had been planning to shoot a documentary about the community, the Chinese community in Milan for ages. Since 1996, I had Chinese friends in Milan, and I knew that integration wasn't an easy point. It was a thorny issue, and I felt responsible. I should have shot a documentary, and I postponed this topic and this tremendous responsibility because I was afraid. I told myself it's too thorny an issue. There's too much stuff to investigate. And then I was living in Paolo Sarpi, full Chinatown in Milan, and it was 2009, and a riot took place between the police officers and some Chinese migrants for a fine to a car. I realized that the potential conflict between the authorities and the Chinese community had come to a pivotal point, and I had to do something, anything. I should not have postponed any longer. So I embraced my camera and I started to shoot. And that's the beginning of Giallo a Milano. That's how I fell in love with China. And that's how I feel inspired to speak about Chinese topics to the Western audience. So we have spoken about inspiration. I promised I would have talked about problems. What kind of problems? Well, I faced a big problem during Giallo a Milano because I bumped into a wonderful carter, a grasshopper, a spy, a criminal, a Sino-Italian criminal that was a member of a teenager gang who took part to criminal acts, small heights, that kind of stuff, through Chinatown, shopkeepers. And the police officers allowed me to interview him. I interviewed him and he told me his wonderful odyssey, the way he got from China to Italy. And I said, it's a wonderful opportunity of storytelling. People have to know why a teenager becomes a criminal and how he arrived to a tumultuous path to Milan. Then I had a problem. I could not show his face. How should I do? How should I act? On TV, what I have done, I would have put a hood on him. Maybe I would have shot him from behind and I would have pitched his voice like this, or I would have pixeled his image. But that's TV. We were shooting with my producer, we were planning with Giallo a Milano to shoot a long feature documentary for cinema. So how did we solve the problem? All of a sudden, one day, I had an idea. I called my producer. Listen, I had a dream. we should create a cartoon, an animation out of his Odyssey. Hello? Hello? Is anybody home? Alessandro, my producer's name, he fainted because animation is pretty expensive. But Alessandro Borrelli, the head of La Sarraz Pictures, who is a very good producer, is a diesel. He works every day for his dream, for a project. So he told me, give me a second, give me some days. He applied for some funds, he got them. So we created a cartoon, and that's a cartoon. And so this is the result of the experimentation with cartoon and documentary, a docu animation, and let's have a glimpse at it.
出生在瑞安的一个山村，那什么也没有，从小就巴不得想早点离开那。我和我的父母合不来，他们的生活太无聊了。我哥哥比我早来意大利5年，那时我也离开家了。我从来没念完书，我觉得读书一点用都没有。人必须学会怎么在这个世界上生存。我想看大城市，我想出去闯一闯。于是我去了温州，开始找些事情做。在温州，我认识了一些年轻人，想赚轻松钱，他们搞些小偷小摸啊，小的诈骗啊。我哥哥在意大利被卷入一些麻烦之中，他交了一些坏人，这些人专门抢劫其他中国人。我决定来找他，因为我觉得我比他聪明，虽然他比我大。这样在其中一次旅行中，我也参与了。但在俄罗斯这个据点，事情出了差错，那都是一些很坏的人，真的很混蛋。我觉得应该特别小心，不要惹麻烦。但当时有一个姑娘非常漂亮，后来有2个俄罗斯人开始对这个姑娘动手动脚，我去干涉。但那2个人很高壮，他们把我狠揍了一顿，我的一个膝盖被他们打断。你看，直到现在我还不能自如活动。这件出生把我弄成了残废了。后来他们把我扣在那里做奴隶，为所有在他们家经过的中国人服务。1年的时间，他妈的时间过得真慢。最终我成功逃走了。那个姑娘最后2个混蛋还是干了他们想干的事情，我有什么办法？最后2005年我才来到意大利，没办法非法移民，但是我连护照都没有。原来我说我哥可以帮我办合法身份，来了以后才知道他以杀人罪被关进了监狱，真蠢。我不想落到他的下场，我总是做一些诚实的小活，开始在工厂里也干过，但总是很倒霉，费力多，赚钱少。认识了不少像我这样没有居留、没有前景的年轻人，他们的父母那样做生活的失败者。我认识他们是在保罗沙比的一个网吧里，有时我们一整天在一起吃饭、睡觉、泡网吧，我们总在里面。对于我们来说，它像是一个避难所，是我们的地方。这样我不得不成为了他们的朋友。但后来我马上明白了，我必须小心。他们中间的一些人干坏事，开始有一点黑社会的口气，我还没当回事。直到他们中间的一些人做一件可怕的蠢事。在一次抢劫中， 他们为了一点点钱杀死了一个无辜的好人。他们杀死了他的原因，只是因为他想保护他的亲人。因为这个警察不像这些笨蛋所想象的那样，他们以为不是在中国，他们犯罪可以不受惩罚，但并非这样。有些人认警察不怎么行，但有很多能干的，他们能说中文，好像什么都懂。原来我也不相信，但后来我真是认识了一些这样的人。在调查案件的时候，也轮到我头上了。警察知道我们的手机号，窃听了我们之间的通话，我跟这些事情一点关系都没有。但因为我认识这些人，他们也认识我，这样就把我抖出来了。我不能接受一件这样的事情，于是我配合警察把他们都泄露出来了。这些混蛋，他们罪有应得。一个来找我合作的警察，他会说中文，他懂应该怎么办。那个警察是一个说话算数的人，他帮我联系了社会服务机构。我有居留，只要遵纪守法、工作、做我自己的生意就行了。我的运气是认识了我的女朋友，她是在意大利长大的，意大利文说得很好，她是一个正经人，我们之间相互信任，我相信我们在一起能做很大的事业。她很聪明，比我聪明多了。她学的是服装设计，搞服装，自己做模特。所以我们正在考虑一起经营年轻人服装成品公司生意。我有计划回中国，也可能在那里开一个服装工厂，也许是明年。我和我哥哥断了联系，他没救了，他不会了解。其实我爱他，但我不能总是保护他，对不对
While we were working on Gialla Milano, I came up with a lot of material. It's called pre-production material. That means I shot many interviews, and I wasn't sure about at the beginning how to create the mosaics, what interviews to insert, what interviews and interviewees, most importantly, to delete. My producer suggested me a wonderful idea. There were European newspapers that were working on so-called transmedia or cross-media platforms. They are pretty cross-media platforms. They are pretty elaborated websites, concocting together, mixing together text, graphics, images, clips. And that released my mind from a creative point of view because really relieved the tension. I felt like I was entitled to respect a lot of the inspiration and witnesses and stories I received from the Chinese immigrants in Milan, and that was one product, the cross-media platform, and I would have done another product, the film, with a stronger selection of stories. And we found as a partner of the cross-media platform, Il Corriere della Sera, the most important Italian newspaper. And let me show you the result. It's funny and instructive. that this is the cross-media platform, and I'm supposed to use an emulator because we use Flash to program it. Flash is not working anymore, so I'm using Chrome and an extension called Flash Emulator. If you want to see it, the URL is Corriere.it/Gialla Milano, the title of the film. Here, a trailer would start. I go for English and find a presentation, project. The concept of the film, the riot I told you. Questions we were asking ourselves. And the advertisement of the marketing for the film. And then what is really interesting, this is the way we implement it. So the interviews, you can choose the counter, or you can see the distribution of the interviews according to their locations. Many people don't come from Milan, so we had a problem of how to let them enter the landscape we shot in. And the Corriere della Sera journalist suggests to us a very simple and small solution. Put a map, and for each map you can use the carta or yellow texts for their pieces of news. You know, you see the articles related to a murder or something positive that took place in Chinatown. And you might have browsed the cross-media platform archetypes as well. Woman got storytelling archetypes, narrative archetypes. The woman buys a sacred piece of paper, the savior agent, the young hero, matron, leader, organ. You see that every time you pick up an archetype, some specific interviews and others activate the elements, so you can choose your own path. It's so-called open dramaturgy, and it worked a lot, both to depict and represent the Chinese variety and diversity in Milan, and to advertise the film. The documentary got released in Italy, then in Europe, then in several countries all over the world, in Canada, in the US, in Australia, New Zealand, for example, and in China. And several CCTV managers and decision makers and so-called commissioning editors, that are the people that decide whom to hire and what contents to invest on. They summoned me. I was unpacking for the, do you mind if I say Beijing? I feel more comfortable. I was in Beijing for the distribution and the screening of Gialla Milano, of this documentary. And they proposed me 4 documentaries about the Chinese history. And I said, oh yes, let's try. So we agreed upon 2014 as a date. I moved to Beijing for several months, and let me show you the way we worked. And that was the second experience in China after The Missing Star, the film with Gianni Amelio. They sent me a treatment, the whole script of the documentary. It was about Liu Xiu, a famous emperor of the Han dynasty, of the renaissance of the Han dynasty in the 1st century, after 54 AD. I was asked to create a visual imagery for each moment of the film, a so-called video board. We were supposed to do a massive iconographic research, and I had an iconographic assistant. She provided me with whatever. For example, I had the idea of using animated tattoos on the people's skin to represent some events, for example, nomadic attacks. So she looked for nomadic tattoos and testimonies in art history of nomadic tattoos as early as possible to be consistent with the Han imagery. Then I suggested the idea to interview our experts in an art gallery with an exhibition of paintings created from stills of our film. So the whole film about Liu Xiu, about this emperor, would have been an exploration of an art gallery with an exhibition about him. Okay, so we created all these elements in plexiglass. We created an exhibition at the 789 district, the art gallery district in China. These are examples. On this painting, we quarreled because, as I mentioned, let's speak about problems. This is supposed to be Liu Xiu's image, and I suggested we use some pop art attitude, so we should erase the face of the emperor, and the graphic designer and the producer felt like it would have been offensive or Chinese heritage to erase the face of the main character. So I had to provide them with several examples of pop art and optical art from Western art history to persuade them. And I consider this not as a cultural barrier, but as a chance, an opportunity to mutual understanding. I consider this as my work, actually. This is another example. Of the paintings we created with the maps, the imagery of Liu Xiu, the emperor. What you see is a map of that is a Polaroid, a rectangular representation, a small frame, so-called pre-cinema, 早期电影 in Chinese, of art history, Chinese art history in that period. So my idea was to use the imagery of the 1st century AD, concocted in a Western way, with an aggressive, original, northern, refreshing graphic design to represent the imagery of our emperor. Here's another example. These are basically tiles, T-I-L-E-S, tiles that you find in tombs. And they're Polaroids of everyday life in China. So I suggested the graphic designer of the film and the scenographer of the film to massively use these Polaroids, that they were so widespread in the Han Dynasty, exactly the dynasty we were supposed to talk about. This is what I came up with. This is a storyboard. In each column, you see the scene, the location, the script content, the reenactment content, day, night, what actor I need, the clothing, the props, possible special equipment, estimated shooting time, possible alternatives, my personal notes. They provided me with a lot of reference images. I had an iconographic research assistant that made sure that every choice we made about the props, which is a short form for properties, the objects of the scenography you manipulate on set, were consistent with the archaeological evidence we have of the 1st AD. So it was a massive course in visual imagery of the 1st century. Okay, this is an example of all the reference we had from other film production as well. This another painting we came up with for the art exhibition. And they gave me so many books of art history at first. I had to study so much, for God's sake. That's the further step. The storyboard to video board. I pre-visualized, as you can see, each paragraph with a solution, with a visual solution. So I brought my own screenshot of my idea, the kind of effect I wanted. So for example, this shot, I'm going to use a tilt and shift lens to have a sort of micro machine effect. Here I want to use this kind of approach. Why don't we interview the expert as a mandarin inside a silk painting? You know, I brainstorm with a lot of ideas. Maps, I want to use satellite images, satellite stills. I'd like to use picture-in-the-picture effects. That's a pre-visualization of why don't you use plexiglass transparent frames over a film and create an exhibition, the painters I showed you before. And so this is the way we work. I pre-visualize the effect of every paragraph so that what the producer does is that she, the creative producer was a she in that case, distributes the work to the whole team. Okay. And you see some parts in red because we had to discuss with the commissioning editor about several ideas of mine. Maybe they didn't like it, maybe they didn't understand it. They hired me from Italy because they wanted to refresh their visual grammar. So they were expecting me to come up with new ideas.
Oh, there we go. Him in person. Hi, Sergio.
Hi.
How are you? Good morning.
Quite fine, thank you. What about
Okay.
you? From France.
Great. We're great. Doing great. Last day here today at China Creative Industries with you and Italy China Council Foundation. Many people connected from Italy, but also from everywhere. So we're very happy and pleased to have you. For this very last session. Just let me tell you, we don't have many, I know we're running out of time, and thank you so much, because I know you're so busy right now, but the chance to having you and just share a couple of ideas together is precious for all of us. So one very simple thing here, you really, with this lesson, took us through a journey, which is creative journey, the journey of a producer, actually, and someone like you gives both these cultures in Italy and China. Been very interesting, and I'd like to ask you a question, which is kind of a sweet question. Let's say, I think it could be useful for all of our audience that, like you, maybe is thinking about working in this particular sector within this half part of the world, which is China and the East in general. The question is partly on the past and partly on the future. So what can you tell us about the very close past that we have, like 3 or 4 years, 3 years now, pretty hard in interacting with China due to, we lost Sergio for a bit, I think. Okay, coming back right now. Okay, thank you, Sergio. No, just wondering, this last 3 years of working with China, I mean, I think it have been a bit complicated for you. So what can you tell us on this side? But what's your grasp on the future then? Because things seem to be open up again, and technology, creativeness, there's a huge will to cooperate, I think, for the future. What's your take on this past-future situation with the world of Chinese?
To whom the question is addressed? To me?
Yeah, Sergio. Yeah.
Because I had this pensive attitude. Yes, it's getting more and more difficult for several reasons. Working in China for a Western expat is more difficult now because China has entered a phase of its development where they want creative directors to be either Chinese or sinologists, which makes sense. It's not the notes or the 90s anymore, where you could move from Italy to China and sell your skills, for example, as an architect, as a creative director, and they would hire you for that, just a sort of milking of Western skills. In the meanwhile, Chinese have moved abroad. Many Chinese brains have come back to China with perfect skills, and they're at least bilingual. So working in China entails now getting trained, getting prepared about the Chinese culture and the Chinese background, first of all. Then there's a problem in distribution. The Chinese market is getting more and more self-referential, and which makes sense. I think it's a good phase in the development of the art world of a given country. It happened the same thing to the US. And you first get self-referential, and then you apply soft power and try to persuade the rest of the world of your vision. So let's make an example. Armenian cinema was great in the 60s and in the 70s. I think that nobody is watching an Armenian TV series on Netflix now because nobody would understand Armenian humor today, while everybody is laughing at the Big Bang Theory, the American sitcom. And if you look at the Big Bang Theory at a certain distance, from a certain distance, that's not Italian humor. We don't laugh the same way. We don't have English wit. We have different strategies of humor. What does that mean? That we got trained by the pressure of the American market to laugh when it is needed by the American scriptwriters. Chinese are doing the same thing, but in this phase, that means that the Chinese market is self-referential. It's building up its own references, and it's kind of difficult to have it distributed worldwide. That's why in the last 4 years, few film festivals in Europe have selected Chinese films. Paradoxically, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early notes, when Chinese were more, allow me the term, exotic. For example, Red Lanterns, that invented Ritual by Johnny Mo, that in 1987, I'd say, 1989, that invents a ritual that didn't exist, the ritual of the lighting of the Red Lanterns. Everybody loved it, but it was exotic. It was built to please the Western audience. Now that the Chinese filmmakers have found their own way, a specific Chinese way, it's getting more difficult in this phase to market their films worldwide. But I think it's, paradoxically speaking, I think it's a positive signal.
Oh, yeah. More mature, probably of a more mature situation over there. Yeah. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you. Silvia, maybe we have a question also for Chiara. Professor.
Yeah, just shortly before we close our time together, because we had before this very interesting overview, and you actually mentioned education as one of the core elements of course the film industry. And also just now Sergio Basso mentioned that you need to get trained to understand also the different humor and cultural values when you have these international collaborations with China in particular, because we are more used to the US approach. So I know it's a big question, but in your opinion, what can Italy do better to prepare for the future and for this collaboration towards China, but also, other countries?
Well, one thing we could definitely do better is probably have like film studies courses that lose a bit this Western centric perspective. So film studies courses that address world cinema in a more profound way. It's very difficult, you know, even if when we do a film history course, we mention, I don't know, Griffith or Spielberg or some Italian directors, neorealismo, but we don't really have even the time, you know, to speak to talk in a more exhaustive manner about world cinema. But yet there is a very, rich, as I think I tried with my talk to clarify this. There is a very rich and important film production also outside Western countries, and definitely one thing we should do is to have like more film studies courses that focus precisely on these countries' cinematographies.
Sergio, I have a last question for you, maybe, and then we all have to close, I know, but very quickly, if you can probably take us into the role of technology, which is so relevant working with China. We've seen in your previous works, even if it was a few years ago, but it was already so brilliant, so interesting, so borderless, this idea of applying technology to cinema, to actual shooting. It's a big talk nowadays of AI, artificial intelligence, of metaverse, etc. And we've seen in the Western world of cinema with strikes in Hollywood and etc. what that means. What's your take on China, though, where technology seems to be a driven factor in everyone's life? You're on mute, probably.
I think, no, I was kidding. No, I think you're totally right. The point is that in China, you have such a massive market that you can experiment. So there is a huge target audience of young people, so-called young adults, university students, that are extremely receptive, and cities like Shanghai and Beijing, but even minor cities, so to speak. For example, Hantan, nobody hears of Hantan in Italy, but we're speaking about a 3 million people city, okay? So young adults experiment with technology via WeChat, short trailers, cartoons, animation for young adults, augmented reality. So the market is ready to be implemented with tons, heaps, lots of content and experimentation. As I underlined, for the documentary I shot in 2014, I had 40 animators from the Department of Animation inside the production department. To tell the truth, the production department in documentary filmmaking was a side business of a video game production company. So that's why it was so easy for them to provide me with animated ideas. And for me, it was the perfect ground to experiment. It would be decidedly more difficult to do so in Italy, not because we don't have the talents, but we don't have such a massive market to pour contents in. That's why I insist that the solution is to get trained in technology in a fast way, because technology is changing faster. So one must be ready to abandon a technology of last year and embrace technology of the last month. First point. Be ready in contents. Let's read Chinese novels, Chinese science fiction, and even Chinese philosophy and Chinese dynastic histories. In this way, we will get imbued of Chinese stuff, Chinese material, and what we are very strong in Europe and specifically in Italy is storytelling. That's a superpower we have. So the way we organize this content in a daft way, in an interesting way, is our core business, is our superpower, is our peculiar skill. Chinese haven't reasoned enough about it yet. Let's make a blatant example. Kung Fu Panda, or even Mulan. Kung Fu Panda. Chinese, they said, why didn't we write that? I mean, it's our story, it's our past, it's our myths. Why? They didn't come up with that because it's their history, but it's not their story. It's not their storytelling. So we still have a voice, we still have an opportunity of co-working, co-producing with them, thanks to our skill in concocting stories. But in order to concoct stories for their market, we have to learn to listen to their market. So we have to read their stuff, watch their stuff.
Well, beautiful. Thanks for this last message, which is an intercultural message. So thank you so much to Sergio Bassi and Chiara Grizzatti. It was a pleasure to have you and to listen from your experiences.
Yeah, thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Ciao.
Bye.
Right.